You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there. Now here's your host, Kurt Linville.
Hey, Adventure Sports Podcast family. I had to jump in here. This is episode 1117, and Trapper Haskins just knocked it out of the park. But not just this episode. I have, since we had this conversation, completed reading his book, and it is so well written. It is so much worth the read. So make sure that you do get a copy of his book and read it. And then I also have been listening to his music. It's on Spotify under Trapper Haskins. And his lyrics are so thought-provoking, and he has such an excellent voice. So with Trapper, we get more than just an interview on the Adventure Sports Podcast. There's also a book and music. The book, by the way, is called Crooked Old River. And I know you're going to love this one. It ran a little bit longer than most because we just had so many good things to talk about. So plan for that and enjoy this episode. Hey friends, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Today is going to be a fun one. We're going to be talking about rowing the length of the Mississippi from the headwaters all the way down to the Gulf. And it was done in 2 stages, and it was a very life-impacting journey. The guest today is Trapper Haskins. And Trapper, I'm excited to hear this one. I have interviewed one other person who actually did a similar trip. But it's just mind-blowing to me when people take on a trip like of this length on a river of that size that's busy as well. But anyway, we'll get into all of that, but we have some other things. Trapper has written a book about this, and the book is called Crooked Old River, Rowing Toward Redemption on the Mississippi. And so you can learn more from the book, but I'm excited to hear more about what this redemption is on the Mississippi. Trapper also is a musician, and he has a baseball league, and we don't normally talk about baseball on the Adventure Sports Podcast, but this is completely different. So I'm gonna visit about him briefly about that so you can see what's going on, because it's super cool. But anyway, Trapper, welcome to the program.
Yeah, Kurt, thanks for having me.
I guess the first question is, were you on an inner tube, or a canoe, or a drift boat, or how did you get down the Mississippi?
We were in an 18-foot wooden rowboat, rowing and sailing boat.
Sailing boat, okay.
Right. So 2 rowing stations and a 72-square-foot sail. The boat was built out of wood, and it's got a canvas sail. The boat is actually called the Mississippi River Yawl, and it's a design that dates back to the 1800s. It's the kind of boat they use on the river. They would use it as a lifeboat on the steamboats. The hunters and trappers would use them in the war. It was basically just like the John boat of the era, a utility boat back in the 1800s.
Okay, so just to get the context, you did this in 2 stages. It's separated by a lot of years.
A lot of years,
like 16 years. But the first stage was, I guess, the longest one, and that was from the headwaters down to New Orleans.
Right. Yeah, so my wife and I'm from Memphis originally, so I was born and raised.
Oh, okay.
On the river city, and I fell in love with it sort of, as a kid. Downtown Memphis, there's a park called Mud Island, and it's now a peninsula, but it used to be an island 100 years ago. It was called City Island. And then in the 1970s, I think, the city built a model of the lower Mississippi River there. And so it's basically like a bathymetric chart. It's a topographic map of the river filled with water.
Okay.
And water flows through this thing every day. And so when we were kids, my mother would take my sister and I down there, and we would eat popsicles at the snack stand and whatever. And then when we were done, we would just throw the popsicle sticks in this little model of the river that's about maybe a quarter, 3/8 of a mile long, something like that.
Okay, so that's good sized.
Yeah, it's good size. And I think the scale works out to, I think 1 step is 1 mile, so it's like 3 feet to the mile or something like that. And it goes from Cairo, Illinois, down to the Gulf of Mexico. So we would throw our popsicle sticks in there and just trace this thing down the river. And from this model of the river, you can look right off the edge of the park and you're looking down onto the Mississippi. And so as a kid, I sort of had my, you get the
That's
Huck
fun.
Finn mythology and stuff. And so I sort of always loved the river. And then, fast forward a bunch of years, I worked on the sightseeing riverboats that sort of tour up and down the
Yeah.
Memphis waterfront. I worked on those. And so that was my first chance to get out onto the river. I did that for a summer in college. And then my wife and I made the youthful decision to both drop out of college about 2 years in, and I wanted to learn how to build boats. And so we got married and moved up to New England, where I did a 2-year apprenticeship in a traditional wooden boat shop up in New England. But while I was there, I discovered the plans to this Mississippi River yawl.
Really?
And one December day with 3 feet of snow on the ground, I don't know, just sort of overcome with a little bit of homesickness or whatever. I left Tennessee thinking I don't want to live in the South anymore. I have no interest in Memphis or the Mississippi or any of that. But seeing this boat up in Maine sort of sparked that sort of love for the Mississippi. And so my wife and I spent about a year building this boat in a friend of mine's garage up there. And after I'd graduated my apprenticeship, sort of my graduation present to myself and my wife before we started life in the real world was to spend 3 months going down the Mississippi. And the intention was to go from the headwaters in northern Minnesota at Lake Itasca all the way down to the Gulf. And, growing up in Memphis, having only ever seen the Mississippi as this huge behemoth of a river,
Right.
I soon learned how naive I was and learned that where the river starts, it's just a tiny little, creek.
It's a stream like everything else.
Bleeding out of this lake. And so we actually did the first 500 miles in a canoe. Then we swapped over to this riverboat. And we spent 3 months, living on the river, sleeping on the sandbars, rowing and sailing. And when we got to New Orleans, of course, the river gets increasingly busy. And when you get down to New Orleans, there are these ocean-going ships and tankers and cargo ships. And we got to talking to a pilot of one of those. And he told us in no uncertain terms that we were, had a death wish and this was crazy and, just really sort of read us the riot act.
Right.
And, I decided, well, I've sort of proven what I had to prove to myself. And so we ended up quitting the river in New Orleans, 100 river miles from the ocean. And then so that was stage one of the trip. And I thought that was going to be the whole trip. And then 16 years later, I had a big boy job and I was working in an office wearing a tie and, had stable income, health insurance, should have been perfectly happy. I had 2 beautiful, healthy children and my wife and I, still together. And it just, the sort of adventurer in me had sort of withered by that point. And I turned 40 years old and I thought, this is not where I thought I'd be.
It's a bit of a wake-up call, isn't it?
Yeah, huge. And, started suffering some real debilitating panic attacks and stuff. I actually ended up in the Vanderbilt psychiatric hospital here just trying to figure out what was going on with me. Wow. I felt like I was kind of going crazy, just stuck in this office. And we still had that boat. That wooden boat had sat.
So that was going to be my next question is what happened to the boat?
Yeah, the boat became a playground. The boat became a sort of shipwreck for my kids to play on. It became a castle. It was whatever the kids wanted it to be while they were growing up playing. And they were 9 and 11 at the time when this sort of wake up call came. And I told Mandy, I said, I want to finish the river. We never finished it. And so we drug the boat into the carport and the kids and I rebuilt. We tore off all the rotten planks and rebuilt it. And then the 4 of us went down to New Orleans in the exact spot where Mandy and I pulled the boat out of the river. We put the boat back in the river with the 4 kids, or with the 2 kids, the 4 of us, and and finished the river. That part got a little exciting too. There's some encounters with ships and Coast Guard boats and the Plaquemines Sheriff's Office, and there was a tropical storm, and so it definitely wasn't. The last 100 miles was not a cakewalk, that's for sure.
Well, you know what? We're gonna have to revisit all of this in detail because it just sounds so amazing. But
yeah,
I've crossed the Mississippi several times, just on a bridge of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first time, it was just a source of wonder for me because I didn't grow up on the big river, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to see a river that big and to see the deep currents that come boiling up to the surface, the muddy water,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know, it was like a living thing almost. And it spooked me a little bit. And I'm a water person.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent my life in water. But that river just looked so intimidating. Of course, when I see water, I always ask the question, what would it be like to swim across or to dive under or to, that kind of thing.
Right.
And it was the first river I ever saw where I thought, oh, that could be a challenge, And
Yes.
anyway, it was kind of terrifying to me. But you grew up with a model of the river and
Mm-hmm.
being on the river and being able to be familiar with it. So this is kind of an off-the-wall question, but what did the river mean to you kind of on that gut level?
Well, like you said, intimidating. It doesn't seem to matter how familiar you are with the environment and the landscape, and like what the water looks like. The speed at which it's going. Like you said, there's boils coming up from the bottom, and
Yeah,
it doesn't matter how familiar you are with that stuff. It's still incredibly intimidating. And I remember as a kid, being at that model, playing on the model of the Mississippi River, and my mother or other adults saying, "Don't you dare ever go down to the real river."
oh
It's just
yeah,
like this big serpent that just kind of rolls past the city. And every year there would be stories of people who had just gone for a quick swim in it. I'm forgetting his name right now. The blues musician went for a swim right there where Mud Island is, and got caught in the wake of a boat, and
oh,
never came back up. And it was super astonishing to me because the same year that we did the river at first in 2002, there was a Slovenian or Slovakian. There was a European um, swimming the river. He was, I think, setting a record or something, and he wore a wetsuit and swam the whole river. And I remember thinking, "There's no way. There's no way. Those currents would grab you and pull you down. The wakes would push you over." I just could not. I couldn't imagine swimming across it, let alone swimming the length of the river. And
right.
Martin Strell, I think the guy's name is, but he did it, and some people have done it since then, and I still sort of marvel at it because when you're on the river in a rowboat, you mentioned those boils that kind of come up,
Yeah,
and I'm sure you get this on some other rivers out west. But if you glide across the top of one of those boils, it's almost like hitting black ice on a road. The boat just kind of pivots around and does what it wants to because
the
the
current's
current.
all snafooey.
Oh, yeah, the current's coming straight up instead of going,
Right.
horizontally. But yeah, I've obviously always been sort of infatuated or in love with the sort of mythology of the Mississippi and the whole, the Huck Finn, Mark Twain, all the steamboats. I mean, when I was a kid, that stuff that was the storybook stuff that I loved. At Mud Island, there is or was a Mississippi River Museum, and inside that they had the model of a mock-up of a steamboat pilot house. And I also remember standing in that pilot house, like
Yeah.
pretending I was driving the boat. So it's sort of always been a part of me. And like a lot of people say, you don't sort of appreciate your hometown until you leave it. And it wasn't until I was
Right.
1,000 miles away that I was like, man, there's something special about that and that place.
Well, it's such a river. Matter of fact, you know more about it than I do, I'm sure. But one of the stats that I heard once that kind of blew my mind is where the Missouri and the Mississippi come together. If they had called the Missouri the Mississippi, then it would be the longest river in the world.
Well,
So,
it's weird. I get into that in my book because the book is sort of a memoir and a travelogue, but being sort of a child of that area, there's a lot of historical asides and geographical tidbits and stuff in the book, and that's one of the things that I get into. Actually, where they come together, it kind of depends on the year.
really, which one's
Some
bigger?
years the Mississippi is more volume, and some years the Missouri is more volume. But the Missouri, um, The Missouri's longer. Yeah, like you said, if they had called from St. Louis down, if they had called that the Missouri, I think it would be one of the longest, if not the longest. But for, whatever reason, I guess cultural reasons, we call the Mississippi the one that runs up into up into to Minnesota. And I also get into in my book that the Native Americans didn't consider the river where it starts. There's Lake Itasca, and then the river flows a little bit into another lake, and then it flows a little more into another lake. And the Native Americans considered each one of those separate streams a separate river.
Okay.
And we the Europeans sort of have this obsessive need to find the one, the point
source
where it starts. Yeah, and I
Right.
think that sort of probably puzzled the Native Americans, but they showed us the way anyhow. But yeah, the Missouri is gosh, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it is I think the Missouri as it is longer than the Mississippi, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but it's an astonishingly long river. Yes.
It's long. Well, big rivers are fascinating to me, and we think about the famous rivers of the world. The Mississippi ranks right up there. I mean, it can hold its own. It's a massive river. But I think about like the Yukon, the Mississippi, of course, the Amazon and the Nile, and some of the big rivers in Asia, and they are all amazing to me. And it's no wonder that poets and musicians and people they really get into rivers. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the aspects of rivers, and the Mississippi for some reason was the one that kind of impacted me the most this way. Water represents a transition between this world and the next. And there's something under the water that represents dying and death. And I think part of that is because there's a surface to the water that's moving and flowing, and we can't see beyond the surface very easily.
Mm-hmm.
So it stirs something inside of us about what's on the other side of that,
Yeah.
But the Mississippi, for some reason, maybe because it's muddy, maybe because it's huge, but when I stand and look at the Mississippi, I'm like, wow, that one gets me.
Yeah, and I think that sort of view of it is not all that uncommon. The Native Americans that lived in the St. Louis area, they have in Alton, Illinois, Marquette, one of the early explorers, had seen this giant bird-looking monster painted on the rocks, and the Native Americans explained that was a creature that lived underneath the river. And up in Minnesota, where you've got the St. Anthony Falls, which the natives had a different name for. In their view, there was a monster that lived underneath those falls under the river.
And you can hear it roar.
Yeah, you can hear it 24 hours a day. But so they have their own sort of traditions and mythologies about monsters living under the river, and it's so muddy. We talked to on the way down the river. We met these welders. They were underwater welders.
Oh wow!
There's a casino boat in Marquette, Iowa, and I said, "How do you weld underwater here? Like, how far in front of your face can you see?" And he said about 8 inches was about all. I don't know how you weld if you can only see 6 or 8 inches in front of your face. But yeah, there were a few times on the river where I intentionally sort of went under, holding onto a rope just to feel how the current sort of pulled you. And it's the world goes silent, and you just hear the rushing of the water, and you sort of become part of that tumbling and with the current. And it's you're in another place. You're here but you're not here, kind of thing. It's special.
That's amazing. Okay, well let's go over the first big leg from 2002.
Yeah.
And the whole idea that you built the boat and you and your wife, Mandy, decided to float this crazy long, massive river. I mean, that does appeal to me. I can't imagine. Matter of fact, the Arkansas River starts just over the mountain ridge from where I live now. And I've thought about getting a kayak and going down until it's big enough or it flows smoothly enough to switch to a canoe. And then going all the way back to where I grew up as a kid in northeastern Oklahoma. the idea of being on the big river that takes you a long, long distance. I mean, that's
Yeah,
kind of what we're talking about. What
yeah,
was that
yeah.
like?
Yeah, it's funny you describe that. Sounds like a homecoming, but you're taking the scenic way home, which is in a lot of ways what we did, because we'd been in Maine for 2 years, and it was sort of like, I'm going to come back to Memphis, pass through Memphis, but I'm going to come back to Memphis via the river. We're going to take the scenic route, and what you talked about doing is essentially what we did. If you talk about taking a kayak up there
Yeah.
near, is it Leadville, or where does the Arkansas start? Somewhere up there near you
Yep,
guys.
it's above Leadville. It's at the Climax Mine,
Okay.
really. Right there is where it starts. And at that point, I mean, you would be wading it because it's not even big enough for a kayak. But
Yeah. Yeah.
as you get to once you get down to about Leadville, then certainly, yeah, you could get on it.
You can
So
get, yeah. So you talk about taking a kayak, and then at the more floatable parts, putting a canoe in, which is essentially what we did. We started in a borrowed canoe and left. We left the rowboat, because this rowboat, they're inch thick planks. It's 18 feet long.
heavy.
It's yeah, it weighs about, dry, the thing weighs about 600 pounds, and so it
Right.
was sitting on a trailer. We left it at a marina on the Mississippi River in St. Paul, and then took a canoe from the headwaters, which, when you get, I'm sure it varies year to year depending on the rain, but I mean, it was barely calf deep. And when we
Wow.
first got in, you got your paddles, the blades are hitting the
Yeah,
bottom
you're
because
just
it's
banging
not.
the rocks in the
Yeah.
mud.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then every day it get just incrementally bigger, and then it goes into Lake Bemidji, and then comes out of Lake Bemidji on the other side, and it's a little bit bigger yet, and it just gets increasingly bigger. But from the headwaters, a lot of people think of the Twin Cities as being the top of the Mississippi, but the reality is, from the headwaters to the Twin Cities is 500 miles. So you're
Wow.
talking about you're talking about a quarter or a fifth.
If all we did is talk about the canoe part of the trip, 500 miles, that would be a
Yeah,
great
yeah,
podcast. That would be
yeah.
fantastic.
500 miles, and I think it took us about 3 weeks to do that, and then we switched over into the rowboat, and it sort of felt like, okay, this is what I came here to do. And some people have asked, like, well, why didn't you just start there if that's where
Right.
that's where you could row the boat? But the sort of completist in me, felt like there would be an asterisk, on the trip if I didn't start at so we started at Lake Itasca, because I wanted to see the whole thing. Being a kid from Memphis and seeing this meager little stream, just sort of making its way across these ancient lake beds and stuff in northern Minnesota, it was just otherworldly. Like, how can this possibly be the Mississippi? But then when you see, it's the same way if you see, your child as a newborn. And now my
Right.
daughter just went off to her first day of her senior year of high school. And I'm
There
thinking,
you
how can
go.
this possibly be the baby that I held 17 years ago? But so
Yes.
just the same, the Mississippi just grows incrementally until, the oars or the paddles aren't touching the bottom anymore. And you can't reach from shore to shore anymore. And it's, yeah, by the time it gets to the Twin Cities, it's a pretty formidable river. By the time it gets there, but you still got another 2,000 miles to go to the Gulf from there. So yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, okay, so you had built the boat you thought you were going to take, but then you ended up in the canoe. Had you
hmm
been canoeing before, or was this kind of a new experience?
The last time that either my wife and I had been canoeing was probably in some middle school camp. Like, we
So,
we were not in any way experienced canoers, but we just decided to go ahead and try it. And like anything, you sort of clang your paddles together, and after a couple of dozen miles or a couple of 100 miles, you sort of figured out. And by the end, we were pretty seasoned, pretty
500
seasoned
miles is a
paddler.
good trip,
Yeah,
man.
yeah. No,
Well,
we were not experienced canoers, but
there's something beautiful about that. And I want to highlight what you just said. Like anything, when you
yeah.
first start, but you learn it. And a lot of people see a dream of an
hmm
adventure, and it seems daunting, or like there's too much of a headwind. It's like, well, I don't even know how to do that.
Right, right.
Well,
Yeah.
learn how to
Well,
do it. It's
yeah, I
fun.
heard just this last week, I heard somebody say, I can't remember who it was, but they said the price of mastery is embarrassment.
Yes.
you've got to be willing to look stupid and just go out there and do something to get to the point where you've got it figured out and got it under control. So the price of mastery is embarrassment.
I've heard it said another way, and it was something along the lines of experience is what keeps you from making so many mistakes, but the way that you get experience is by making so many mistakes.
Yeah,
Something
that's
like that.
100% accurate. Yes, that's very much how we felt
Especially in
in the
carpentry
canoe.
too, right? I mean, how do you
Oh
learn
yeah,
to be an excellent carpenter?
oh yeah. I'm sure I miscut a couple of planks building that boat. There's no question about
Well,
that.
it's a good thing we have board stretchers. That helps.
Yeah.
So, how did you feel, you and Mandy, when you finally got back to the Twin Cities and you're able to get in? Do you call it a John boat? What do you call it?
We call it a yawl boat, which is what
Yaw boat.
the yeah YAWL is how it's spelled. Yeah, Mississippi River yawl. So we just called it the yawl or the rowboat.
Okay.
But her name is Oxbow. So
Oxbow.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Which, if you're familiar with rivers, is sort of those crescent shaped lakes that sort of flank these meandering rivers. They're old bends in the river that got cut off, and so we felt like our boat was sort of a ghost of the old river, and so these oxbows are sort of ghosts of the old river too. So it seemed like a fitting name. But yeah, when we got in Oxbow, it definitely felt like closing one chapter and starting another one that I was super excited for, because I knew once we got in that boat in Minneapolis, I knew that boat was going to take us on that river all the way back to home and hopefully the Gulf. The plan was to be in the Gulf in about 3 months. And the whole trip did take about 3 months, even though we didn't make it to the Gulf. But once we got in that thing, I knew this is my home for the next 2.5 months.
Yeah.
Inside the rowboat. Yeah.
Well, so in the canoe, did you try to stop at towns and get hotels, or did you have a tent? Did you camp by the river, or what did you do to get that far?
Yeah, I bet we camped probably 98% of the nights. I mean, every now and then, we got a hotel in Bemidji. I remember that. But so the nice thing is, in Minnesota, that headwaters region, the Minnesota DNR has set up campsites, and so there are campsites with grills and portalettes,
Just all the way
and
down.
yeah, well, from the headwaters to the Twin Cities, or from the headwaters to close to the Twin Cities, not all the way down, but so there are designated campsites that you can camp on. So we stayed in a tent. I remember hanging our food from those on the, what do you call them, the bear, hanging them
Yeah.
so the bears couldn't get to them. And but once you get down to the Twin Cities, after that there's no more DNR sites, but the entire Upper Mississippi is a National Wildlife Refuge, and so with the locks and dams, the river sort of pools and it's created hundreds, probably thousands of islands that do not have any sort of structures on them. And so we just, so again, before the Twin Cities, we camped in DNR sites. And after that, we would just, around 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, as we're rowing, we would just start looking for a sandy bank to sort of set up on. And there's some beaches on the Mississippi that would rival anything that I've seen on the Atlantic or the Gulf Coast. It's some
That's fun.
beautiful sandy stretches there. Yeah.
Very, very fun. Did you have sleeping quarters in the yawl boat?
No, it's an open boat. If you can imagine, just a John boat without the flat bow. It has a pointing bow, but it's 18 feet, 3 seats in it, completely open, so there's no cabin
Completely
at all
open.
on there. Right. So we never slept in the boat. We always slept on the banks in a tent. But again, every now and then we would meet somebody on the river that would invite us to their house. We had some really cool experiences, met some amazing people, but most of the time we slept on the riverbanks. But it's funny when you start out, and I'm sure this doesn't just go for river trips. On any sort of extended endurance trip, you always think it's going to be the nature and sort of the environment that makes the biggest impact. But
Right.
man, the people you meet along the way, these just unexpected, unexpected conversations. People become. I mean, we met some canoeists on the river that I'm still friends with today, and we had complete strangers give us the keys to their car to run to a grocery store in case there wasn't
Nice.
one near the river. And so we would stop in towns, and we had a big cooler on the boat, so we would just load up probably 3 or 4 days worth of food. We had 2 jerry cans that carried a total of 11 gallons of water. Even though we're floating on millions of gallons of water, we weren't
Right.
we weren't drinking the river water. So yeah, I mean, it was like any other camping excursion, I guess. Just the difference being we were floating from campsite to campsite, or rowing. Rather, we didn't float quite so much. We did a whole lot of rowing.
Was the current enough to help out a bit, or did you really feel like it was a lot of work?
Yeah, what's interesting is they say that if a raindrop that falls in Lake Itasca will be in the Gulf of Mexico in 90 days. It takes about 3 months
Okay.
for water to go from one end to the other. And I think that when we started this trip, I really did think we were going to spend a lot of time, sort of like Huck Finn, just floating down the
Right.
river. And then we would use the oars to sort of get out of the way of the towboats, or maybe hit some landing that we wanted to go to. But the reality is that summer, when we measured the current, it was only going about 1.5 to 2 miles an hour. And so we really did row probably 8 hours a day, because we were averaging something like 30, 35 miles a day.
Okay.
So yeah, it was quite a bit more rowing than we thought it would be. We also had a sail, and I thought we'd get to sail a whole bunch, but being in the summertime, the prevalent winds came out of the south and the southwest, and so a lot of as the river's going south, we had a lot of headwinds, and so we sailed, I think, a total of about 15 miles of the whole river.
No way.
But
15 miles? That's
yeah,
it?
we sailed two. There were 2 different days we had a north wind, and we put the sail up and got about 15 miles. But so we had kind of come up with this trick to figure out the current. So every day at noon we would stop for lunch, and we had charts. We had like the navigational charts, the same ones that the towboat pilots use.
Right.
And there's day markers. There's markers on the side of the river with a mileage counter. And so when we passed one, we would stop for lunch, and we'd stop for exactly an hour. And then an hour later, I'd sort of figure out where we were on the chart, and then just do the math and figure out how far did we float in an hour.
Right.
And I got to tell you, most of the times it was only about 1.5 miles. Some days it was 2 miles. So it's, the current's moving. It's a powerful current, but it was not bombing along like it maybe would be in the springtime when there's snow melt and
Right.
Spring rains and stuff. So this was August, September, and October that we did the trip, and so the river wasn't low, but it certainly wasn't going at its fastest.
Interesting. I think about all the questions the listeners must have, and we could spend 3 hours on this, Trapper, with no problem. People are going to ask, well, what about all the barges? The big boats that are using this waterway. I mean, you don't want to tangle with those.
Yeah, no, you don't. Well, fortunately for us, those towboats have to stay in the shipping channel, and the shipping channel is marked by green and red buoys on either side of the channel. And this rowboat that we had is a flat bottom boat that only draws 3 or 4 inches of water. And so
you could go anywhere with that.
Yeah, we really could go anywhere. So we would stay in the channel, because that's where the quickest current is. The current runs the quickest there. But if we saw a towboat either bearing down on us or coming around the corner coming up towards us, we would just kind of mosey on out of the channel and just sort of skirt the shoreline. So the funny thing is, when you're rowing a boat, you're looking backwards the whole time, so we're heading downriver.
Right.
And so every couple of strokes, Mandy or I would look over our shoulder to make sure we weren't on a collision course with any big boats. But yeah, we would just skirt out of their way a little bit and stay on the side. And I think initially we were worried about them throwing up a big wake,
Right.
but they really didn't. And also, being in Memphis, you'd see these towboats come by, and I just sort of imagined this kind of parade of towboats, just sort of a nonstop procession of them. And the reality is there were some days where, I mean, half the day would go by and we wouldn't see another boat, a pleasure boat, a towboat. I mean, it'd be noon before we saw anybody. Now, there were other days when they were sort of crowded up around the locks and dams, but it was surprisingly uncrowded in the northern part of the river. And again, those are more like lakes because there's something like 29 locks and dams between Minneapolis and St. Louis. But once you get past St. Louis, it's a free flowing river all the way to the Gulf. There's no dams. It's just going at its own pace. Yeah.
What was it like going through the locks?
And the first one was kind of a little intimidating because you go in this big chamber and you just hear these doors just clang shut behind you. And then the water starts draining out. And so, this cavernous concrete room you're in just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So anybody who's unfamiliar with that whole system, is basically like a liquid staircase that goes from St. Louis up to Minneapolis. And the reason that the Corps of Engineers did that was to give the towboats enough depth to be able to push a fully loaded barge, because if there were no locks and dams, there's times of the year that the river would be unpassable, but those dams hold back enough water to allow the towboats to move. So,
and they also mean you have to row your boat a lot more because you don't have much current.
That's right. Yeah, the northern part of the river, definitely a lot less current. Yeah, because it's a series of, like I said, 20. It's a series of lakes, 28 lakes or something like that. Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of rowing.
Okay, did you come to a time where you and Mandy were like, why did we do this? What have we gotten ourselves into? Or was it more a matter of, this is working. I think we're going to make it.
Again, anybody that does these sort of endurance things, there were days of just excruciating boredom. Where you're just rowing for hours on end and the scenery doesn't seem to change. I don't know that there was ever a time that we questioned why we were doing it. There was definitely an instance when I wish I wasn't there when we were in the state of Mississippi. We had a fisherman who, it became clear to me that he was a little inebriated and he was a little smitten with Mandy, and a loaded pistol came out, and that we had an issue there. That's a whole scene written about in the book. Obviously, we both made it out okay, but I mean, that was the only time when I thought, God, I don't want to be here. There were other times. I remember when we were going through Natchez, Mississippi. I still remember this. Mandy said to me one day, it was a beautiful, sunny fall day, southern Mississippi. And, we realized we were coming up to the last state line would be going across the Louisiana state line. And I remember Mandy saying to me, she's like, I wish this river could just go on forever, because we really for the most part, had a just unbelievably, romantic time going down the river, just meeting amazing people and sort of living that dream I'd had ever since I was a kid at Mud Island. I was on my own little popsicle stick going down the river, basically.
That's so much fun. So you wrote a book, which I want to talk about the book a little bit here. Mm-hmm. But before we do, had Mandy written a book, would it be the same book? How different would it be?
I know that, and I'm very grateful for the fact that she did this trip because I wanted to do it. Now, she's an incredibly adventurous person. And as I write in the book, when I first broached the subject of doing the river with her, that I think if I had said, hey, do you want to hike the Appalachian Trail? I would have gotten the same answer, which was, hell yeah, let's do it. Because she's just a very outgoing,
go Mandy,
adventurous. Yeah, Mandy's, I've said many times, if you read the book, that a couple of people that have read it have said, man, Mandy's really tough. And I said, yeah, Mandy's tougher than I've ever pretended to be. So it's, she's a good partner. But, so she did it because I wanted to do it. And then 16 years later, when we went back, she said to me, and this is in the book, she says, I don't need to go back to the river. I did what I needed to do there. But if you need to go back, then I'm all for it and I'll go with you. So if she had written a book, I think, we had a similar experience, but we had different motivations. I think her motivation was being the incredible partner that she is. And my motivation was, I don't know, maybe proving something to myself that I needed to prove. And I don't think she had that same, I don't know, maybe it's a shortcoming. I don't know. She didn't have that same desire, I guess.
Same drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I like to ask people why. Why'd you do it? And it's fascinating. People always have a different why. But I think in the end, when it's done, often the why is even changed because of the experience. It's like, I expected this, but I got that instead.
Oh, 100%. I totally agree. Because I think that my why, when we did the trip in 2002, we were in our 20s. We were newlyweds, been married for a year and a half. And I think my why at that time was just the pure adventure of it, just to take the scenic route back home to Memphis and be, it'd just be this sort of like triumphant return, maybe from Maine. I'm not sure. I think it was just the pure adventure and just to try to experience the history of the river. I think that was my why. But I know for a fact when we went back in 2018, I was working that office job, and my why for going back and finishing the river was because, truthfully, a lot of things, or some of the things that I had sort of begun in my life had not gone the way that I wanted them to go. I'd had some failings, whatever, in the music industry, and I had a wood shop at one time that I had to close when the economy sort of took a crash around 2010. And so I took that office job just for some secure, predictable income and to have health insurance and that kind of thing. All of those sort of like adult decisions you make
Sure.
when you have a kid. As I turned 40 and looking back on what had brought me there, the more it bothered me that we hadn't finished the river. And it sort of became just one more thing in my life that I had maybe begun, but not really seen through to completion, or hadn't really succeeded in the way that I initially set out to succeed. So I think that my why, and I don't know if I've ever thought about this, but I think my why in going back, in 2018 with the family was to just kind of set things right. I guess that's the tagline of the book is rowing toward redemption on the Mississippi, really trying to prove to myself that I did have what it took to finish the river in the first place, even though we didn't, to prove that I still had that sort of like spark of an adventure inside of me. To just sort of reclaim who I once was. I think that was definitely my why on the second trip. So yeah, it meant a lot more on the second trip. It was personal, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, I get that. You hear people talking about midlife crisis, and I think that for a lot of people, what that is a realization that we don't live forever, and a realization that the dream we had when we were 20 looks different when we're 39. And it's not a matter of succeeding or failing. It's a matter that life has a current, and it's going to steer us too. And I hear people say real life is what happens when you made other plans.
It's painfully true. Yes.
And so I get it. I mean, I'm not going to go on about this, but I was asked the other day, what would I tell my 18-year-old self? And I thought for just a second, and I thought, I would tell my 18-year-old self never to take that first job.
That is a great question. That is a really good question.
And because what you did is you worked in the trades, you had your wood shop, you built a life around the things that you loved, the skill set that you had developed, even working on this boat, Yeah. But then you got to the point of, well, I've got to take an alternate route for a while.
Right.
And what was that like to go into the office setting?
Yeah. So the office that I worked in, it was adjacent to the industry that I was in before. It was an architecture firm, but I went from building stuff to being the guy sitting at a computer drawing the two-dimensional drawings. I wasn't, and I'm not an architect. I just I got a CAD certificate. And so when things were kind of bleak for us financially, and we had dropped out of school years ago to go to Maine. My wife went back to school to finish her graphic design degree she had started years ago. And when we dropped out of school, I was an English major, and I did not want to go back and be an English major because I knew I would just be stuck in a classroom or something like that. And so I went back and I got a CAD certificate. So I just got a 9-month certificate to draw stuff on the computer.
Which is
And
great, by the way.
What's that?
Which is great, by the way.
It was, and it served its purpose at the time. And it was sort of the shortest path between financial ruin and a steady paycheck, basically.
Yeah.
But I recognized very quickly after being in there, it was the first job where I'd ever had a computer, the first job where I ever had a chair that I sat in. I mean, I've always been on my feet building stuff, and it became clear after about 4 to 6 months, once the predictability of the paycheck wore off, once the sort of newness of the job wore off, that this is maybe does not fit my identity very well. And but I didn't really know where to go at that time. I didn't want to leave and go back into the trades, which were, still kind of still trying to make their way back from the market crash. But so I stayed there for 2.5, close to 3 years, just sort of toiling away at it. And again, it wasn't until I turned 40 and had this sort of lightning bolt morning. It was a rainy Monday morning in the winter, just weeks after I'd turned 40 years old, and I was getting ready to go into the office. And I thought, my God, this is what it's come to, and this is what I'm going to do for the next 15 years until I retire, or 25 years, or whatever.
All right.
25 years, goodness. And just, I couldn't face that. That prospect was just too depressing, too bleak. And I started to suffer these panic attacks, really. I'd drive downtown to the office wearing my shirt and tie, and I'd get in the elevator and I'd be nauseous in the elevator going up there. I'd put on my earbuds and turn on the computer and just start having my heart would start beating really fast. And I was just, it was not, it wasn't healthy at all. And I didn't really recognize why. I was like, what is going on? And I ended up checking myself in because I was really worried about what was happening. The psychiatrist, and I get into this whole thing in the book about how he really made me aware of the fact that, eons ago when we were on the savannas in Africa, we've got this fight or flight, the amygdala in your brain sort of triggers this fight or flight for dangers. And those are external dangers, but with our modern brain, it doesn't always differentiate between external dangers and inner dangers. And those inner dangers can be like an identity crisis, that sort of, who am I?
Right.
And it can trigger the same sort of reactions that would be triggered if you were faced with some life or death, battle with some wildlife or something, as crazy as that sounds. And so I remember him asking me, has anything changed in your life in the last few years that would sort of shake up your sense of identity? And I thought, oh yeah, everything. And very shortly after then is when I went home and I said, I've got to quit this job, and I want to go back to the trades, but I want to do the river first. I want to finish that, I want to put a pin on that at the finish line. So,
well, Trapper, I'm going to be really open here. You just told a parallel story to why the Adventure Sports Podcast exists.
Yeah.
My first year in the office, 2 years in the office, I thought I was going to die.
Yeah.
Completely numb. I'd sit down in the chair and just be like, what am I doing here? I'm not knocking office work. I mean, it can be a wonderful thing, right?
Yeah.
And matter of fact, I have a 30-plus year career of it that fed my family and offered us beautiful opportunities. But there was always this part of me that said, this is not who I am.
Right.
And when Travis and I started the podcast 10 years ago, it was a call to that, It was like, we know what we love to do on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
We know what we wish we could do full time. But at
Right.
least we can start a podcast and encourage people to do more of it, get more
Yeah.
involved. And I mean, I spent all of my spare time adventuring. That's really what it was all about. But it was kind of that crisis in
Mm.
identity, and it's a very parallel story to your own.
Yeah.
Okay, the book is called Crooked Old River, and the
Hmm.
subtitle is Rowing Toward Redemption on the Mississippi. And you just explained the motivation and what you went through. We totally get that, right? How did it feel with your kids now
Mm.
to launch the boat, be back on the river again? Can you describe that moment?
Yeah, it was everything I wanted it to be for a few minutes. When I ask the kids now, this is a couple of years ago, when I ask the kids now, yeah, how was that going back on the river? And my daughter was terrified, and my son was bored, and they have both said, I don't want to go back out on any rivers. But
Wow.
I'm hopeful that I planted a seed in them to to sort of follow through with things and to sort of chase their own adventure. But for me, excuse me, personally, when we launched back on the river, it was really surreal. It was very surreal because we were in the exact same place that we had been 16 years earlier when Mandy and I were in
Right.
our 20s, our mid 20s. And here I was now 40, 41 years old with these two little kids. And it was surreal. It was magical. And it was within a few minutes of us being on the river, pretty horrifying, pretty terrifying. Yeah.
Well, now you had the really big traffic to deal with all the way down.
Right. Right. Yeah. We had, the same tankers and stuff were there. The difference was, and I didn't think about this when we went out there at first, but the difference was when Mandy and I had gotten to New Orleans 16 years earlier, we were expert rowers. We had spent every day on the river. We could judge the closing speed
Right.
of ships and barges. And we were sort of at one with that environment. And now, 16 years later, we relaunched directly into that same environment. And the same way you might become rusty as a musician or any other thing. I mean, we
Right.
knew how to row. That was just like riding a bike. That wasn't the issue. The issue was judging the closing speed, like I said, of these ships around us. It was an unbelievably crowded day in the port of New Orleans, and it was a foggy day, or it turned foggy
Oh, no.
very soon after. Yes, it wasn't foggy when we got on the river, but by the time we got out there, within a mile or two, this fog sort of drew a veil over the river, and
Oh,
it got real sketchy real quick. And that's where the book actually opens, with us going back into the Gulf of New Orleans, and the Coast Guard ends up making an appearance very soon after we. So that's why I say that it was sort of surreal and beautiful when we first got on the river, but within a few minutes, it sort of turned into a climactic, dangerous situation, and a situation that I think my father-in-law has maybe not quite forgiven me for yet, bringing his grandkids out into that environment.
I interviewed a lady, oh boy, 7 years ago or so, who had rowed across several of the oceans, and she was going to do the Pacific, and she left, I believe, from Japan, but she hit so much shipping traffic the first day and almost got taken out by one of these.
Really?
Yeah, and it was the same kind of a thing that you're talking about. She survived it when the ship was on top of her and she couldn't get out of the way. She fired a flare, and they saw the flare and missed her, and so she turned around and went back and said, "Nope, not this trip." And
Oh my God!
I can imagine. Just think about the size difference and the speed difference and the power difference, right? You have, I mean, you can stay out of their way, but if they can't even see you, you're just like a moth hitting the windshield of a car going down the highway.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. You're invisible, and that's one of the things. 16 years earlier, when we had talked to that pilot of the ship, he said, "You realize you guys aren't even in a metal boat. You're in a wooden boat, like on the radar and visually."
you're invisible.
He said, "You guys are invisible out there."
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it's
So did you finally? I mean, I don't want to spoil the story, but did you make it to the Gulf?
We made it to the Gulf, but not with the kids. When we launched the boat a couple of days into it, there was a tropical storm well offshore
Oh wow,
called Tropical Storm Dennis. And when we were about halfway done with that first 100 miles, they were projecting, this is no lie, they were projecting Tropical Storm Dennis to hit the mouth of the Mississippi the same day we had planned on getting down there.
really?
And so we actually had to abort that first trip. It was Labor Day weekend 2018, and we got 50 of the 100 miles done, and we had to call it off. And I remember on the drive home telling Mandy, like, well, we're going back. I'm not, I can't come that close
Right.
and then not finish it. And I get into her reasons in the book, and she said, we can go back, but we're not bringing the kids. And so they were there for half of that return trip. And then kind of poetically, it was just she and I on the last few miles, the same way that it was,
And that's what
16 years
needed to
earlier.
happen. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Huh.
I didn't want it to be that way, but once it happened like that, it sort of felt, yeah, this works. This works.
Golly, rivers are a metaphor for life, aren't they?
100%.
I mean, my kids are all but one have graduated from college, and it's my wife and I in the boat again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
it just that's the way it works.
It's beautiful and it's sad and it's amazing, and yeah, it's everything all at once.
Oh, Trapper, I wish we had hours more. I'm going to go a little bit long if you have time. Is that all right to go another few minutes? And for the listeners out there, I'm just enjoying this so much. I hope you are too. But I have a few more questions that we just have to ask. So when you got back on the water with your kids and the fog bank moves in and then you've got a tropical storm headed your way, and it reminded me of probably my favorite backpacking trip that I did with two of my sons. But we were in a valley that there wasn't really even a trail because no one ever went there. It was so deep in the mountains. And the storms were unbelievable. You just rain and hail and lightning. And at one point, we took shelter from a hailstorm for quite a while. And then as we're hiking on up, we saw smoke in the forest. And we thought, wow, there's another person out here. Unbelievable. There's a campfire. And then the smoke went away, and we realized, no, that was a lightning strike.
Oh, wow.
So there was nobody. But the point of all of this story is when we finally climbed out of that valley, we had to go over a very precipitous pass with no trail. And the top part of it was literally rock climbing with our heavy packs, with way more exposure than we wanted. But I had inquired how to get through that with rangers and stuff, and they said, well, no one's ever done that we know of. There's not a way,
What?
But when we got out the other side, we got up on top of this pass at about 12,500 feet or maybe a little higher. The sun came out, and it was wildflowers and mountain lakes and sunshine and birds and butterflies and unicorns. And my son said, it's almost like that valley just didn't want us there. It was, it was such a battle to get out. And all we had to do is just get out of that one valley, and everything was glorious after that.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, did you have kind of that feeling when you got back in the river and the fog moves in and the tropical, it's like, it just doesn't want us here,
Yeah, I think I have a different viewpoint of that because I did have a similar sort of thought, but it was not the river just doesn't want us here. My thought that I remember having is it wants us here. It just wants to test us. It doesn't, it's not going to provide an easy path. We're not just going to skate down there, but I feel like after hitting all of that traffic years ago and the pilot warning us away from it, it was almost like to come back into that environment. It couldn't it couldn't have been easy. You know, I feel like it was the way it was supposed to be. And I don't know if that's, I don't know. I think the river, if it wanted anything, it wanted to sort of maybe make sure that I really wanted to finish it.
You know what?
It wasn't going to hold my hand on the way down.
It fits the stage of life you're in too.
Mm,
You know,
so much.
it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to give you this.
Right.
You got to pick yourself up by the seat of your pants and get
Yeah,
through. Isn't that the way it is?
You're going to have to fight for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So the word redemption, rowing toward redemption on the Mississippi, did it work?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I remember saying that it's in the book where when we finished the river, and my wife, she's just such a stoic. And she asked me, we got to the very end and we're standing on the last bit of land there. So we rowed out into the Gulf and then turned around and sort of beached Oxbow on that last little spit of land. And she said, how does it feel? And I was like, I don't know whether, I don't know whether I want to double over and cry or just laugh uproariously. I don't know. I had such a mix. I had such a mix of emotions, that's whole, I think maybe it was bitter. It was bittersweet. It was everything I wanted, but it was like when you finished some grand thing, whatever that thing is, man, it's really like you just really feel. I mean, like the finish line is so, it's right there. You see that the river's there. There's land on both sides, and then all of a sudden, it's just ocean. And
Right.
so it's a very discernible finish line. And so to reach that finish line 16 years after we had initially set out to do it was, it was beautiful and bittersweet. And I know I wept a little bit, and Mandy, of course, did not, because she's a stoic, but, it was, I'm glad we did it. It was worth going back. It did for me what I think I wanted it to do. And that was to sort of prove to myself that I still had it in me. And then when we got back from the trip, I never went back to the office. And I'm still doing carpentry, doing finished carpentry and furniture and the kind of stuff that I love doing. Work on some historic homes sometimes. Being a history geek, I love working on a historic home if I get the chance to do that.
Oh, so cool. Well, hey, do you mind reading just a short passage? Something
Sure.
that would give us a feel for the flavor of your book?
Yeah. That's what I'm going to read the first couple of paragraphs in the book, so that the part that we just talked about in the port of New Orleans, 2018.
Okay.
The day we relaunched the boat. So, so the book starts, way into the story. So this is prologue, Port of New Orleans, 2018. When the ship emerges from the mist, it is clear we are in danger. It was not there just moments ago when we readied our oars and decided to cross the river. Now, like an apparition, it looms. The vague outline of its monstrous form comes into focus, as though the thing is materializing out of the fog, constructing itself from the very air. My 9-year-old son is seated in the stern, his eyes wide with awe. He is too young to fully comprehend the crisis that is unfolding. My daughter, nearly 11, crouches in the narrow taper of the bow and fixes her gaze on the immensity of the oncoming tanker. She understands the predicament.
Oof.
I know this because I can hear her crying discreet, muffled tears. Their mother, my wife of nearly 20 years, is focused solely on the task of rowing. She and I are furiously pumping the oars, trying to pass through the channel ahead of the ship. The boat we are traveling in is not quite 18 feet long. The hull is painted dark green and sits only inches out of the water. To the industrial operations along the Mississippi River south of New Orleans, we are a nuisance. Looking down from the refinery docks, scowling men in hard hats gesture for us to move on as though they are swatting away a pesky mosquito. To the tanker, this steel monolith churning upriver, we are invisible, inconsequential as a drifting twig, and we are directly in its path. What the hell are we doing here, I think, my mind frightened and racing. It is the beginning of a holiday weekend. We could be anywhere else, the beach, the ballpark, the mountains. But we are here in the low light courting death on this river, and I know why, because I've been here before and I left something unfinished.
Wow. Okay. Well, I am lucky because you sent me a book and now I can enjoy reading it. I'm super
Good.
excited about
Yeah.
that. That's going to be fun. I have not read it yet, but I am going to, Trapper. I really think that's fun. We got to wrap up, but
Okay.
I want to hear about your music.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So do you have a place where people can hear your music? What kind of music is it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's, do singer-songwriter kind of stuff. I live south of Nashville now. I'm in Thompson Station. But, growing up in Memphis, you got to play an instrument. If you live
There
in
you go.
Nashville, you got to be a songwriter. And so, I'm on Spotify and YouTube, just as my name, Trapper Haskins. And yeah, I've been playing guitar since I was about 12. Been writing songs since shortly after I picked up a guitar. So, early teenager. I put out a few records. The last record that I put out is called Blood and the Honey, and that came out in 2020. We released the record right at the beginning of COVID, so all of the all the promotional shows got canceled, and
Oh, man.
it was a brilliant time to put out a record, I'll tell you. But I've got a new batch of stuff that I'm working on trying to get recorded. But I've been doing that for many years, and again, it's just under my name, Trapper Haskins, and it's also I've got a website, trapperhaskins.com. And that has got my music on there, and also has the book is for sale on that. The book is on Amazon, but the book is also for sale at my website on the store. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's very, very cool. And then just as a parting shot, I promised the guests or the audience that we were going to talk about a unique kind of baseball. So tell us what you're doing, and we'll wrap up with that.
Yeah, so I play what we call vintage baseball here in Nashville and around the state of Tennessee, and this is baseball as it was played in 1864. So the rules are a little bit different. We wear the goofy old-time uniforms. We play a bare-handed version of baseball because gloves didn't come around until about the 1880s. And so we play, again, vintage baseball. If anybody walked up to the field, they would immediately recognize it as baseball. But some of the rules are a little different, like the ball can bounce on the ground and be caught for an out. A fielder doesn't have to catch it out of the air. So the rules are a little bit different. But, yeah, we play in a league that is competitive, but it's not contentious. So it's more if you have a love for the game, if you love history and the camaraderie and stuff, then we invite people to come out and play with us. Our youngest player, I believe, is 18, and our oldest player last year was 80 years old. There's teams all around the country. We play up in Ohio. We've played at the Field of Dreams in Iowa. We've played down in Georgia. But, yeah, we're all around Tennessee, or the Tennessee Association of Vintage Baseball. So if you're a history geek, a baseball lover, just all around good person, you'd probably enjoy it. If anybody Googles vintage baseball, that whole world will be opened up to them.
That sounds like fun. What's the name of the league?
Our league is the Tennessee Association of Vintage Baseball.
Say that again. The Tennessee Association of Vintage Baseball. Did I get it right?
That's correct. Yep. We're on Facebook and probably Instagram, I think, but definitely on Facebook. And yeah, anybody in the Tennessee area, our games are free. There's no tickets. You just bring a blanket and a picnic, and come out and enjoy some old time baseball.
That's really fun. You mentioned before the show that it's soft pitch, right?
It is. It's an underhand game. Yeah. So that was one of the rules in 1864 was the ball had to be pitched underhanded. Yeah.
And I like the bounce idea. I mean, barehanded baseball sounds terrifying in a way. But being able to let it take a bounce, that helps. That's fun.
It does. It evens the playing field because some of the young bucks get out there and they just crush the ball. And if you can get to the ball before it hits the ground a second time, the batter's still out. So,
oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Well, very, very unique. Well, Trapper, thank you so much. The name of the book is Cricket Old River. The music is Trapper Haskins.
Yes, sir.
And it is Vintage Baseball. Say the full name again.
Our league is Tennessee Association of Vintage Baseball. Yeah.
Very, very cool.
But again, there's teams all over the country. So if somebody just Googles vintage baseball, they can probably find a team in their area if they're into that sort of historical nerdery.
Well, and what I love about it is the camaraderie that you were talking about. And I encourage people, do something where you can interact with others and reconnect with this beautiful world in which we live.
Yeah.
It's worth it. I think it's super cool that you're doing that. Well, Trapper, thank you so much for your time. I
Kurt,
thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and it sounds like such an epic journey, but it's not just a single event. You shared with us the journey of life, and I thank you for that.
Kurt, I appreciate it so much, man. I really appreciate you having me today.
Oh yeah, you're quite welcome. And for all the listeners and viewers out there, figure out what it is. What is that thing that you've got to do, and get out there and have some fun.
Amen.